When Justin Trudeau and the Liberals were elected, they promised evidence-based policy, decision-making, and legislation rooted in evidence, not in ideology. I think most people just kind of shrugged and laughed when he said it, not really believing it, but what about when the evidence says the opposite of what the Liberals are trying to do? That's certainly the case when it comes to combating hate speech and hate crimes. I've done numerous videos on it. This report from the Parliamentary Justice and Human Rights Committee that calls on legislating into human rights law regulation of online speech. But there's another dimension to this. The very premise of that committee's study, the premise of this report, was that hate crimes are on the rise. Let me read literally the first sentence of the description of this report. With the rise of hate crimes reported to the police and the use of online platforms to promote hatred, several groups have requested that this issue be studied by Parliament. Right there, the very first words of the very first sentence, with the rise of hate crimes. Except that isn't what the numbers are suggesting. And this isn't just some fringe study that says this. We're talking about data from Statistics Canada. Despite the government ramp up in the fight against so-called hate, which it doesn't define in any of its reports or materials, hate crimes are actually on the decline. The number of police-reported hate crimes decreased in 2018 by 13%, which is not an insignificant sum, going down from 2,073 in 2017, which is a higher than normal year, to 1,798 in 2018. Hate crimes against Muslims, according to the report, were down the most, with more moderate declines in hate crimes against other groups. And continuously, the largest victimized group by hate crimes is the Jewish community. Anti-Semitic hate is once again the most common type of hatred we see. Why these numbers are important is not to say that hate and hate crimes don't exist in Canada. It's to say that anyone talking about them being on the rise or them being a clear and present danger, those terms were used by witnesses standing before the Justice and Human Rights Committee's online hate study, are not in alignment with what the facts say. What's worse is that we've allowed groups and political advocacy organizations and commentators and pundits and yes, the Trudeau Liberals to weaponize the fear of hate, to present this image that Canada is a much more hateful and disharmonious place than it actually is, and to use this as a way to wedge in legislation that otherwise no one would go for. Look at the anti-Islamophobia motion, M103. That motion was put in because the government said, oh, no, but hate crimes against Muslims are on the rise. And that's why a lot of people were too terrified of criticizing it because they didn't want to be seen as Islamophobic. And now we have a Justice Committee report where the premise is inherently disproven by the government's own numbers, yet still I haven't heard a peep from anyone in the government about it. So when the numbers are saying that hate crimes are down and the legislation is saying that hate crimes are up, you have to question where the agenda is. And unfortunately, there is a hate industry in Canada, across the West, organizations that make considerable sums of money by presenting this narrative. And one of the suggestions that was actually put to the Justice Committee was that third-party groups like Muslim groups or gay groups or groups representing minority interests would become the entities to which hate crimes would be reported rather than police. So these groups are ultimately seeking a budget and a mandate to do things that should be the work of law enforcement. And this was actually one of the concerns that I had with the Justice Committee's findings. They embraced that suggestion in one of the recommendations, saying that people often feel more comfortable reporting hate incidents and hate crimes directly to civil society organizations. So police forces should work collaboratively alongside these so-called civil society organizations in data collection, and more importantly, resources need to be allocated to these groups, to these organizations. So what we have now is these groups and special interest groups specifically that stand to benefit from the government presenting this narrative that hate is on the rise, when we should be as a country very grateful that it's on the decline. Do we have more work to do as a society? Yes, but that's not coming about through any of the recommendations that big government is proposing. For True North, I'm Andrew Lawton.